Welcome to Star Trek Picard Season 2, Episode 3, Assimilation. This will be a review containing spoilers for anything prior to this season, this episode, and possibly anything that's been spoiled before the season. Haven't watched a trailer, so anything that's upcoming from that, I don't know about yet. So this episode takes off right where we left off in the last cliffhanger, which wasn't really a good way to do a cliffhanger because we kind of already knew what was happening. This is a streaming show, and it didn't really leave anything to the imagination. The ship was boarded as our heroes were trying to make their escape from the evil Confederation version of reality to slingshot around the sun and get back home with the help of the captured Borg Queen. So Elnor had been shot right through, I don't know if it was his heart or that similar area, but his chest was bleeding out from that. The husband of not 7 of 9, I keep wanting to call her that. Her name is Annika in this reality because she was never assimilated, has boarded as well as some security guards. They hold our team hostage for, 4.2 seconds. 7 tries to play a little game where she is the president, acts like she's the president. He calls her bluff, quickly disarms and dispatches them. Now, one thing I wasn't sure about is Elnor had been shot by one of their guns, and all it did was seem to make a hole in his chest, a very painful one that was maybe eating him from the inside out. But all of the guns, once our team took them over, instantly disintegrated the other crew. I don't know if that was a setting change. Just a little odd to me that one of their guns would do one thing, and the second time we saw them, seconds later, they did something else. Anyways, they're completely disintegrated. I guess they wanted to get rid of their bodies so they wouldn't be around when we traveled back in time, which is basically what happens next after we take care of that. Agnes had been trying to, put the Borg Queen attachment into the ship. Didn't go so well because the ship was getting fired at by some Confederation vessels. I don't know what their version of Starfleet is. Probably still called Starfleet. We're getting walloped a little bit. The Borg Queen finally gets hooked in. She hooks herself in after she escapes the containment center and starts assimilating the ship, shooting back, destroys the Confederation ships that are on our tail, and we decide to finally fly into the sun and start performing that slingshot back in time. Now, around the same time Elnor is dying, kind of framed like when Icheb was dying last season, except instead this is Elnor on the table dying, and Rafi is the one that's kind of over him crying and wishing for him not to die. I get this is supposed to be an emotional scene. We've, technically had a season plus with Elnor, but he was barely featured last season. Hasn't done much this season. He kind of seems like a character they want us to care about, and he's pretty much out of this entire crew the one we've spent the least amount of time with and have the least attachment to. I know we were supposed to feel something when this happened, but I just hadn't gotten enough of him yet to really care, if that makes any sense. But after he dies, we finally make it back in time. They kind of wrestle the power back from the Borg Queen because she used a lot of it up traveling back, and enough to control the crash into just outside of LA. Now, Picard takes the controls, puts in some coordinates, and says they're going to go home instead of crashing into the middle of LA. I think what he meant by that is that he was taking them to the vineyard. I don't know for sure. They never really addressed that, so I guess we'll have to find out later, but I'm pretty sure that's what they meant. Now, after the Queen had been siphoning power, she's kind of hanging there like that, not much going on with her. They got a little bit of power in the ship, but not much. Rafi kind of loses their crap at Picard, blaming him for everything, not really believing that Q was responsible. Thinks that if Picard had taken a firmer stance with Q, none of this gamesmanship stuff would be going on. We did actually, while they were traveling back in time, see Q briefly. Only Picard seemed to see him. He was only there for a couple of scenes. I don't know if there's supposed to be more to that, like this is all in Picard's head or something, but it was a little odd that he was standing right there and no one else seemed to see him. Don't think that's the first time that's ever happened, so could be anything. Then they start talking about the Watcher, who they've gone back there to see now. This Watcher person, from the trailers before the beginning of the season, I think they wanted us to believe the Watcher is these characters with the white eyes in the past. Not sure that's what it is. I think that might be a misdirect, and those are other things going on. Maybe some sort of drug or early version of synthetics. I don't know, but I think the Watcher might be something different. And if I would had to put my thoughts and my money on it right now, I think the Watchers, whatever they are, whoever they are, maybe multiple, maybe one. I think it might have something to do with the Traveler. That's just me. I do believe one time when we met him, he did say that they had their eyes on humanity for a while, and that's kind of how they chose Wesley. So I'm thinking it might have something to do with them. Again, just me theorizing. Don't really have any evidence for that at the moment, but let's see if that's plays out sometime in the near future. Anyways, they turned out that the 2024 Los Angeles is the time that the Borg Queen had figured out last time. That's roughly where they traveled, although I don't think they ever got an exact confirmation as to when they arrived, as far as a specific date. Now, in the DS9 episode that took place back in this time period, that was also 2024 in San Francisco, and that was September 4th, 2024. Now, I don't know, it probably took place over a couple different days, but if we can figure out the time they are in, that could be a clue as to if this is prior, after, or heck, at the exact same time as those events from DS9. So that'll be interesting as we continue going forward. This is also, about 25 years after the Voyager crew went back to Los Angeles. That was, I want to say 1999, but it might have been 1996. Can't remember. It was basically the same year that episode was filmed. That's where the Doctor got his mobile emitter from ChronoWorks, which is the future-influenced company that stole technology and basically invented the microchip revolution. Since the timeline didn't diverge until 2024, I have to imagine those events took place. And if those events took place, some of that stuff's got to still be around. I know Henry Starling, the guy who ran that company, flew into the future and died, so he won't be around, or shouldn't be around, but some of the tech and things he had been working on has to have made it, out into the public somewhere. So that also, I guess, could have had something to do with the eugenics war we really haven't covered yet. So be interested to see where they go with that, if they bring it in at all. Now, one point to note is that 7 of 9 had not yet joined the crew during this episode. That was still during the Kess years, so she wouldn't have any information about this. I don't know if any of that information had made it into the public, Starfleet database after Voyager returned, whether or not that was something 7 really knew about, learning about after the fact. So if they don't make any reference to that, I guess it doesn't really matter, because none of our characters really would be familiar with that. So we'll have to see. Will they reference any of these time periods that are kind of in the same place as ones we've seen? Also from Voyager, the Millennium Gate, that took place at the turn of the century. Will that be referenced? I don't know. That wasn't time travel. That was just a story. So I'll also be interested if they kind of reference that at some point. So anyways, back on the ship, while they're getting ready to go out and figure out what's going on, they look through the clothes on the ship to look for something more appropriate. I guess it's lucky they had a huge wardrobe on the ship that, wasn't too out of place, although I don't think the clothes they were wearing were all that suspicious. If they just, took off the emblems and whatnot, they probably would have looked okay. I think Rafi actually looked worse after she put on those fingerless gloves, but that's just me. I don't think that's really a look that people were rocking. Well, maybe it's 2 years in our future, so I guess that might be a really cool look in the next 2 years. So they get ready to go. They figure out that they're going to have to beam out. They only have one shot. It's not going to be perfect. So they get ready for that. 7 kind of has another look in the mirror where she doesn't have her Borg implant. And basically from there on, she kind of seems a lot more loose, a lot more free, a lot happier with herself. I actually am loving. That's one thing I'm loving throughout this entire season. Not the series, just this season so far, is how they're characterizing. And I guess I'm going to have to call her Annika Hansen from this point on, because in this timeline, she has her memories from our timeline, but she was never assimilated. That means she doesn't have, this is the first time, after she escaped the Confederation, because that was a whole ordeal. This is the first time we've ever known her since she was, 5 or 6 when she was assimilated. This is the first time she's been completely free of any Borg influence, because even after, Voyager rescued her, even up through all of we've seen in the first season of Picard, she still had the implant. She still had Borg stuff inside of her. She still had, I think, a fake eye, all these things. She was still dealing with Borg procedures. She wasn't free of the Borg. This is the first time she has been an actual human being free from the Borg with nothing holding her back. Now, I know there's still, her memories, but I think this is great characterization. She's kind of free for her first time in her life, her own person. So they go through the beaming problems. Rafi and Seven show up, kind of where they're supposed to. Seven beams right in front of a girl, pretends she's a superhero, gives a little wink. That was kind of cool. Rios wasn't so lucky. He got beamed into midair above a fire escape. Didn't quite catch it. Bam! Landed right on his face. Knocked the hell out. Not great. Not how we wanted to see things go, but, we've got to have some drama there. So he's knocked out. Rafi and Seven eventually meet up. Rafi immediately, of course, seems like she landed in one of these sanctuary districts that were, we were talking about back in the DS9 days. They are basically housing the poor people. They're kind of where homeless are allowed to go and live, but in such a way that they're shunted away from society so the regular people don't have to deal with them and look at them. So the first thing happens to her, she gets robbed, doesn't really remember what money is, takes her a minute. Disarms the guy really quick, knocks him out. Seven shows up and is like, well, you really making friends here. They take off and try to figure out what's going on with their mission. They find that tallest building, which they did say what it was called. It's a real building, but I do not believe the name of the building is what it currently is in our time. So whatever happens in the next couple of years, I guess is going to be responsible for why that building would change names or change ownership. So back on the ship, Picard is kind of fighting with Agnes a little bit. Agnes wants to half assimilate herself to get into the Queen's mind. Obviously, Picard thinks that's a really stupid idea. She eventually talks him into it, so they do this little assimilation game where Agnes takes the Borg's Queen's mind into her own, and they kind of do this thing where she's searching through the Borg Queen to find some information at the same time that the Borg Queen is trying to search through her mind, and she's going through each room in her mind, taking a look at her emotions. Some interesting acting and reactions there. Didn't hate it. Thought it was kind of an interesting way to convey, I guess, how the mind is working, although some of the words she was using just, they came off as written. I don't know if that really makes sense, but they didn't come off as natural. They came off as a writer was sitting there like, what would be a good word to explain this? But maybe that's just the type of person Agnes is, because she is a little out there, a little unstable, a little motor mouth, a little, off. So maybe that is just the type of way she would speak. She's got these words, locked and loaded, ready to go. So that goes on for a little while, back and forth. She seems like it's the Borg Queen's getting to her, so Picard kind of freaks out a little bit. They eventually cut it off. What it seems like happened to me, they don't expressly mention this in the episode, is I think the Borg Queen and Agnes kind of cross-assimilated each other, because the Borg Queen the Borg Queen hadn't been acting the way we are used to her acting throughout this episode, but I guess that could be played off as she's disconnected, the last of her kind, temporally insane a little bit. But she's acting way different after this assimilation attempt at Jurati. What I think happened is they cross-assimilated each other. She kind of took on a lot of the quirks and personality of Agnes, and I think we're going to find out that Agnes took a lot more from her than what we know she took, which is the coordinates. I kind of like the way I said that, the coordinates, for where the temporal change is supposed to occur. And also, by take, I think she actually removed them from the Borg Queen's memory. So she didn't just take a peek and say, oh, that's interesting, copy it down. I think she physically ripped it out so the Borg Queen no longer has access to it. At least that's how it seems. So that's kind of neat. I do think there's some more going on, and we're going to have to deal with ramifications of some cross-assimilation, but could be interesting. And that might explain why in the trailers we saw when it first came out, Jurati was kind of doing some maneuvers that I don't think she would normally be up for. But we'll have to see what happens with that. So, of course, they take a moment to switch back to the other storyline with 709, Annika Hansen and Rafi. They're trying to get into this building, the highest building, so they can kind of scan throughout LA. They get stopped by a security guard. There's a cute little thing where they, Annika doesn't really know the local terminology, but Rafi does, and they convince him they just want to go up and take a selfie. So, cute little scene, I guess. Then they talk about the climate change and how the pollution and forest fires and all that stuff is kind of gonna lead to what we saw in the alternate future. So this is kind of seeming like the decision point of time right now is how are we going to escape this awful, awful future and get the nice future from the normal Star Trek timeline, although that's not very great either, because in order to get to the Star Trek timeline we're familiar with, we have to go through World War III and a hell of a lot of nuclear destruction. So I also don't want to have that happen. So can they fix all of it? Thank you very much. But that's kind of their storyline. I think that's pretty much the end of theirs. Rios wakes up in a hospital, but more of a clinic, I guess, for undocumented immigrants and people that just want to stay off the radar. They fix him up good. He has a little thing going with the main doctor there. Meets her son, a cute little kid who kind of scams him out of free cookies for the comm badge that he had dropped when he came in. So that was kind of a cool scene. I think the for characters we haven't known very long, I kind of like them. So I hope we see more of. I think her name was Teresa, and I don't know the son's name. I think it started with an R. But anyway, so they end up getting arrested at the end of this, though. Rio stays behind when the immigration police come and wants to help out, pretends he's a doctor. That doesn't work out so well, and he and Teresa get arrested. That's kind of where we leave off. As they're getting dragged out by the cops, Picard tries to contact them via the comm badge, and we hear Picard calling for Rios as he's dragged away. That's the end of that scene. The one thing I do want to point out is peanut butter blossom cookies were what appeared in this scene. Can't even tell you if I've ever seen them in a TV show before. So that was delicious and delightful, and it might be my favorite part of this series so far. Now, the coordinates that Agnes got from the Borg Queen's mind, where the change in the timeline is supposed to occur, they're supposedly they're supposedly supposed to be at a specific place. I don't know if she got a specific time, or at least they weren't told. So those coordinates were 34.0488 north by 118.2518 west, which basically comes out to around Pershing Square in LA, around 505 S. Hill Street, that general vicinity. If you take a look at some of the pictures I've been scrolling across, you'll see the rough coordinates. No idea if that's supposed to mean anything. I'm living out in New York myself, so I have no idea if that's a particularly poignant location. I don't recall if anything in Star Trek has happened there in the past before. The only thing I can recall is in Voyager. What is it? Was it Janeway? I think Janeway took a look at where they landed in LA. Or no, was Voyager in LA, or was Voyager? I think Voyager was in LA, and said the whole area after an earthquake sank into the Presidio. So possibly this whole area is not long for the world. I don't know how long it's supposed to be here. I can't remember the date they said, but that could also come into play. So some interesting things, kind of getting accustomed to the timeline. It felt very, very Star Trek 4 crossed with that episode of Voyager where they went back, which for the life of me I can't remember because I'm terrible at these things. I think it was Future's End Part 1 and 2. That episode, I'm a huge Voyager fan to begin with, but that was a good one. That was kind of one of the starting points where they were changing things up a little bit. They introduced the Future Federation Time Police sort of thing, which they played with some in DS9 also, and a little more further on in regular Voyager, and then think they were kind of related to where Davis was from Enterprise, but I'm not sure. So there's this whole temporal investigations unit thing in future Starfleet that's supposed to protect the Temporal Prime Directive. Don't really think that's going to come into play here because as far as Star Trek goes, they kind of only bring them into play when they want to. You know, there's a lot of time travel and shenanigans going on with time that they don't have any impact on, but I think the normal, the line they normally use is, well, they didn't interfere because that time travel was supposed to happen and they only kind of protect the timeline from things that aren't supposed to happen. Again, if this is related to Q or my theory, Q and Guinan, I think those forces are kind of above what we would have technologically in the 29th century to prevent. So they might not have the ability to monitor the timeline and protect from that. I don't know. It's just kind of an interesting thought because they have kind of loosely in the background established this temporal investigations unit, these time cops, for lack of a better word, in Starfleet, the Temporal Prime Directive, and they really only come into play if that's the specific story that they're looking to tell that week or that movie or whatever. Although I don't think they were ever referenced in the movies. So possibly they could come into play. Braxton, I think Captain Braxton was that first commander we met when they went back in time in Voyager. He wouldn't still be around in the past. So I'm just trying to think through here. Is there anyone we've met that would still be in the past? Possibly Guinan, because remember, this is all pre-change to the timeline, which means everything that's been established in Star Trek canon up until 2024 technically should still have happened because the time change has not occurred yet, unless they do one of those wibbly-wobbly time changes where at the point of change it fractures forwards and backwards through time, so it can change both ways. I hope they don't do that, but anyway, so that would mean everything that's happened up to this point has still happened. So anyone, Guinan would technically still be here. I don't know if she was still on Earth at this point. We know she was in San Francisco around the turn of the 1800s to the 1900s, because she was in that episode where we met Tom Wayne. That's not even a real person. Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, and Data's head should still be in that cave. I kind of thought it would be cool if, Picard knows that and, they're stuck back in time and he tries to go get some help from his old friend Data. Do not have any reason to think that's going to happen. Just something I thought would be cool if they, heck, even if they bring it up as an option, like, oh, is there anyone we can go to for help? He's, well, possibly we could go get help from an old friend, but, well, I don't want to change the timeline, blah, blah, blah. So even if they make reference to that fact, I think that would be cool. Those are two confirmed people around in this time period. Enterprise went back in time, so yeah, back from their time, forward from Picard's. No, forward from there. I don't know. This time's travel stuff has already given me a headache. But they were there in the early 2000s, so they wouldn't be there around this time. But there is potential for things that happened in the Ad episode to play a part. I think they went back to around Seattle, so they're not necessarily close by, but be interesting if there's some sort of Easter egg in the background of the leftovers from those indie that came in. Okay, yeah, obviously a lot of time travel back to the 60s era from regular Star Trek, the original series. Don't think any of that would come into play. DS9, they went back in time to the Roswell incident, so would be kind of interesting if after all these time travel incidents we do run into a sort of division that's been working behind the scenes that's kind of sort of an X-Files-y thing or something like that, that's kind of collected these bits and pieces of all the crazy time travel stuff related to Star Trek, because I think starting in the probably starting in the early 1900s, there's been time travel up through the mid 21st century, almost every decade. If you take a look at all the Star Trek shows, and we know from Carpenter Street and Enterprise there was a Vulcan living on Earth, unless T'Pol was lying during the entire second half of the 20th century. So there's a possibility of a lot of these stories kind of culminating in some sort of, conspiracies going on in I wanted to say the real world, but the normal Star Trek world that we come to know, that's supposedly branched off from our current timeline. But that's, as we get further and further along and our timeline diverges from what they predicted to be the future of their timeline, now our current time, some things have obviously been proven wrong. Some things have come pretty darn close. So that's also always a possibility that they're trying to set those things right. Also, as I mentioned a lot earlier in this video, the eugenics wars took place in the late 1990s. That era, the ramifications of those could still be going on in this time period. That might be part of the reason these sanctuary districts were created, because of the genetic modifications, the genetic purity people were dealing with. We haven't seen Soong yet, except in cameo. We know he's supposed to be in this season, played by Brent Spiner. We know that his family has a history with, synthetic life as well as genetically engineered life. Probably at this point, neither of them are that far along, so maybe he's dabbling in both. We'll have to see what comes from that, but I'm still looking forward to what happens with this season. This episode was a little bit more on the questy side, breaking off into groups, each group doing its own thing. So I'm really waiting for this story to take hold and charge forward. The first episode, regathering the group. Second episode, regathering the group in a changed timeline. This episode was, so we've had 3 different settings so far. I don't know how long we're going to stay in this time period, but it kind of seems like each episode is, takes a quarter of it to regroup and propel forward. So I'm hoping we have a good place, a good jumping off point, and we can propel forward at this point and go along. Because one thing that Discovery has not been good at, well, there's a lot of things, but one thing they've consistently been poor at is pacing a good story, whether or not they're telling a season-long arc or not. They're not good at the pacing. They'll slog through a few episodes, then one episode is just, here's everything, and we've wrapped it up. So I'm really hoping Picard can solve that middle mystery. I know they've got some different writers working on it, some old Star Trek people, some people that have worked on other sci-fi series. I'm hoping they're getting down this arc, because aside from DS9 in a roundabout way and Enterprise Season 3, Star Trek hasn't ever really had to do the long arcs. And I think Star Trek is more made for ongoing overall arcs, but episodic stuff in between. So for instance, I think Voyager would have been a better show if they would have addressed the Lost in the Delta Quadrant thing more and still told those stories from time to time. Maybe had a few episode arcs, but in my opinion, I like Star Trek to not focus on a single thing for 10 episodes and tell us nothing outside of it. Picard's a different dog, because I do understand that it's kind of like a spin-off sort of thing. It's not really your normal typical show. It's more of a personal journey for Picard and his new gang of misfits. So we'll have to see where this goes. I am liking the pacing of the episodes themselves. It's just from episode to episode to episode, it seems like they're resetting and then launching off. Resetting, launching off. So if they can stay in this timeline going forward for a couple of episodes, I think the momentum will build for the big payoff, and I'm hoping the payoff is worth it this time. Last season, not so much. It was kind of build up, build up, build up, build off, build up. Oh, here comes the tentacle monsters. Oh, you're going to turn them off. Okay, great. We'll see you next year for more Star Trek Picard. But anyways, those are my thoughts. I've rambled on a lot longer than I intended to. I'm sure none of you are still here, but if you are, do all those YouTube things. Like, share, subscribe. Tell me what you thought about Picard, what you thought about anything Star Trek related. If you've got any theories, I'll probably be making another theory video here soon. And if you want to see more, just stay tuned to this channel. And I will see you in a couple of days for the next episode of Picard, if not sooner, for more theories. Talk to you later, and computer, end the program.